r/AskReddit. Serious, what was the worst mental breakdown you've ever witnessed? Back when I was in college, there was a girl in my English class that got into a shouting match with the professor over the correct pronunciation of the word Newfoundland. This girl was screaming, calling the professor an idiot cause he didn't pronounce it Newfoundland. She wouldn't have it any other way. When the professor humored her and asked the class to raise their hands if they thought he was pronouncing it correctly, everyone around her raised their hands. She began screaming, like calling everyone an idiot, and she dropped on the floor and began to roll, begging God to punish her enemies. Campus security dragged her out the class screaming and yelling. Then the professor continued with his lecture as if nothing had happened. We never saw her again. Edit, since people are asking. This was in California back in the fall semester of 2001. We hadn't even gotten our textbooks yet. Wherever she is, I hope she got the help she needed and doing better. Edit, guys. The argument was not about the nuanced pronunciation of a single word. She was adamant it was pronounced as 3 separate words. That's weird. Couldn't have put it better myself. My aunt has struggled with mental illness her whole life. But when her husband of nearly 40 years left her, she spiraled pretty quickly. The family was notified by a neighbor that they hadn't seen her for weeks, and when the house was entered she had defecated in several rooms and would only crawl along the floor. She has been hospitalized ever since. That's fucking horrible. I'm sorry. I didn't expect stories like this. I thought it was going to be about toddlers pouring their milk on the principal because she's a bully. Wow. Watched a casual friend that was schizophrenic slowly spiral when he was off his meds. He posted about once a minute for 18 hours on a site we were involved with. It was scary and sad how fast someone can separate from reality. Edit, he was also on the Opie and Anthony show, where they kind of forced an episode on him by repeating the same scenarios over and over, then acted like he left. It was really uncomfortable to watch. Opie and Anthony show, where they kind of forced an episode on him by repeating the same scenarios over and over, then acted like he left. It was really uncomfortable to watch. Never understood the appeal of those morons. I listened to an episode or two. It was clear to me these turds were just bullies ducking with less fortunate people for laughs. I tried listening to a few. I don't remember laughing even once, and I have a pretty dark sense of humor sometimes. But they just seemed like total meatheads. I didn't get the appeal either. My ex had a severe panic attack one night and went outside in just boxers in the middle of winter. Lay down in the snow in the fetal position and cried. I had never experienced this before, and it freaked me out as I wasn't sure how to deal with it. He didn't seem to recognize me or his surroundings. I managed to get him into the house, and after some time he snapped out of it. He didn't remember it happening. Does he have as needed meds for panic attacks? There are stuff they can give you once the panic attack starts to stop it. Sounds like this particular person would have needed long-term meds and acute incident abortive ones. That whole situation sounds terrible. A random guy on the street was crying and looking really distraught as he approached me yelling, "Can you help me find my shoe? Can you help me find my shoe?" Sure enough, the guy was wearing only one shoe, though he happened to be holding the other one in his hand. I wonder if he was looking for the shoe on his foot or the shoe in his hand. These are the questions that keep me up at night. I've seen a couple, but the worst was when I was deployed. I won't go into the whole mission and what happened, because it's a long story and not needed for what happened to this person. There were a group of small children that ranged from ages 7 to 11, maybe older. We could only determine age by size of them. They were all badly burnt, and skin was melted on their faces. None of them looked human. More like a ducked up wax effigy for some macabre art gallery. Anyways, our medic came up the small embankment and saw it all. I've seen people die and lose GHW light of life in their eyes. Like when someone turns off the light switch. But that was the first time I saw it happen to someone who was alive and well. The life in his eyes just went away. As if the devil said, "And that's the last thing you will ever see." And click. Doc walked around aimlessly trying to put the children back together, and eventually our first sergeant had to wrestle him down because he refused to leave. He didn't scream. Didn't talk. Did nothing. And that's what was creepy. A few weeks go by, and he talks to himself. We all see him throughout the night walking around the cop just muttering to himself. He would hit himself in the head sometimes as well. Our first sergeant, who was recrustiest of the crust type of guy, sat down with him and talked to document. Doc just sat there with that dead look. No life. They ended up sending him home due to combat ineffectiveness. He did not talk to any of us anymore, and 2 years later he killed himself by hanging himself in his kitchen where his wife found him. That day is forever burned into me. No matter the dream I have, he is in them with that dead look on his face. We all wish there was something we could have done for him. But there wasn't. Something in his brain turned off that day and he could never get over what he saw. This is the worst one. I can't even imagine. I'm sorry that happened. All of it. Veteran depression and PTSD is something that needs more funding. We send these kids out there and don't support them mentally adequately. When they come back, all they get is a thank you for your service. We need to focus on such programs rather than ducking giving tax breaks to rich people and building expensive walls. There's a customer where I work that legitimately believes she is the wife of Bill Clinton. She's really nice, but her mind is completely gone. Also, she gave me a Christmas card signed her and Bill Clinton. I take care of an elderly British woman. I live in the Midwest, and she gets very upset about every other day because she is late 40 with the Queen. She's very sweet, so we usually just take her back to her room to get ready and dress her in fancy clothes. By the time we are done, she's usually forgotten about the Queen, but is still vibrantly happy that she has on her fancy clothes/shoes. Edit. I'm seriously so happy my highest rated comment is about one of my wonderful residents. That's just awesome. Yeah, I'm always really nice to her and just nod when she talks about Mr. Clinton. It's good to be extra nice to people like her because they can't help it. I had a French teacher lose it when a kid said the class made her want to kill herself. Next thing we know, the teacher is sobbing and proceeds to tell us all about her failing marriage, her husband's opioid addiction, and how she can't even afford therapy because the school/the health plan again. I quietly gave her the card for my old therapist who worked on sliding scale fees after class. You did the right thing. Good on you for trying to help her out. Hopefully she got better. Yeah, she's a lot better. I'm friends with her and she's still teaching at the same school, but a different subject. My father. He hated communism. Hated Russians. He hated me for being disabled. He hated my mother for refusing an abortion. After the fall of communism, he very soon lost his job. He started to drink more. Started to beat his family more. One day my mother decided to leave him. He had a terrible meltdown. He went shouting around the neighborhood that foreign agents destroyed what worked so well, stole everything from us, and wanted to part us from Russians, and that American spies got him fired from his job. Because he knew stuff, he was a carpenter. But I guess American spies were interested in dark secrets of wood impregnation. He threatened to feed my mother my ugly head and kill her. This went on for 2 weeks before he got arrested and then went into psychiatric care. I tried to help, but I think he's still homeless to this day. Did the neighbors call the cops, or did someone else? My mother's father did. I don't think there was any other option at that point. Had a friend who was the nicest guy. Polite. Hard worker. Rarely drank and only in moderation. He never cursed. Had a great relationship with everybody. And I don't think I ever saw him get mad. I was at his place one day with his roommates when he got home from work. He yelled at us to shut the duck up. He went to the fridge and grabbed 2 ears. Pounded those. Slammed the fridge. Went to his room and slammed the door. His roommate goes to check on him to see what's wrong. His roommate also happens to be a paramedic. He quickly diagnosed the problem as physiological. We zip-tied his hands, threw him in the car, and sped to the hospital. He was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm and put into a medically induced coma. While the family was notified and the debate had over whether surgery was appropriate, he passed away. Edit. To clarify, we only cuffed him when he refused to go willingly. Since there were 4 of us, we were able to do it without hurting him. That was impressively astute of his roommate. Yeah, like WTF. This dude needs to be my doctor. My father was in the hospital for 4 months total due to brain damage among many other issues. When he finally got to come home, he completely lost his shot a couple of times over really trivial things. One of the worst times was over a blanket. He had thrown out a white blanket about a year before. He came into the living room and started screaming about the blanket. He threw things, flipped the couch over, and had a crazed fit for over an hour. He just wouldn't hear anything anyone had to say to him. Eventually he almost fainted. My husband has brain damage from manuscript and sometimes gets very irrational and very emotional over trivial stuff. He's to the point now that he recognizes it, can usually separate himself for a bit, and can talk about it afterward. It was really hitty at first, though. I used to be a cop. One day, we got a call from a lady that a schizophrenic brother was off his meds and acting crazy. He had been screaming at imaginary things and destroying her apartment. We went over there and pretty quickly determined that we needed to get him into custody and take him to the hospital to be committed for a psych eval. He had completely destroyed the apartment. He'd punched holes in the walls. Broken furniture was all over the place. He was screaming at all sorts of things. He was talking in mostly gibberish. It was pretty wild. While we were there trying to figure out the best way to get him to come with us, we really didn't want to fight with him if we didn't have to. He looked at me and started screaming in pain. He started begging me to stop. After a few minutes, we were able to figure out that he thought I was shooting laser beams out of my eyes at him, and apparently they were quite painful. So, I told him that I would put my sunglasses on and they would stop the laser beams from getting him, but he would have to go to the hospital with us. He agreed. I put my sunglasses on. He calmed down and off we went. Ran into him a few months later when he was back on his meds. He had no idea who I was, but he seemed to be doing much better. Edit. Well, this got a bit more attention than I thought it would. Thank you to all of you for your kind words. I really was just doing my job. And to all of you folks who are saying that we need more cops like I was. I agree. But believe me, there are so many amazing cops out there already. It's only the bad stories that we hear. Stuff like this happens on a daily basis and no one ever hears about it at all. Overall, cops in the US are pretty amazing. I guess that's not really an appropriate scenario to go, oh hey guy, remember me? Puts on sunglasses. Well now do you? I was in 4th grade I believe when his happened. Our class along with 2 others were in PE. All practicing cool tricks on the jump rope. The teacher calls us over and we all sit and watch her show off some cool tricks. As this is happening, a kid wraps the jump rope around his neck and pulls it tight, causing him to choke himself with a jump rope, turning dark purple in the process, and screaming "I hate my life" through his coughing and gurgles. He was stopped, and the school had to issue out a letter to all students about what happened, and that parents should watch out for their kids. This kid went on to do more stuff. But that first mental breakdown he had was the worst for me simply because he was only in 4th grade. I can still see it in my mind plain as day. That sounds like he had some really bad stuff going on. I hope he got better / is better. Do you still have contact with him? What has been going on with him? Girl in high school just went completely nuts one day, starting spouting off about how she was God's chosen one. She then got on the ground and started eating the grass. Some girl tried to help her up and get her to stop. She snapped at her like a rabid dog. Thus reminded me of an old Bible story about a king called Nebuchadnezzar. He's God's chosen one in the sense that he was one of those that God chose to use to bring punishment on the Israelites due to their disobedience. But he became very prideful and was warned by dream that if he didn't repent and turn back, he would be sent to eat the grass of the field, acting himself as a wild animal. Daniel 4:33. Immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. Maybe this girl in high school had been reading this? Yeah, but at least Babylon has good science and trade. Free great scientist for discovering writing is goddamn amazing and lets you get a super early academy. When I was 10 my mother had a breakdown and spent an entire night hitting and kicking me, making me tell her I hate her and screaming. She had broken her leg few months before, and on top of a chronic condition she was no longer able to work. Seeing my mom turn into this horrible monster terrified me, and later that night she had cooled down, gave me a couple painkillers, and cried while apologizing. I'll still never forget how she looked the entire time she was doing that. Jesus. I'm sorry. My mom threw a big pot of boiling water at her 3 kids, but thankfully we dodged the boiling hot water and pot. Your story stirred me up a bit. Thank you for sharing. I pictured her throwing just the water. You mean she threw the whole thing? Geez. Glad you're okay. My mother is currently in a psych ward. We thought she had been talking to someone who wasn't there, but she'd just say she was talking to herself when we asked. She had a history of mental health issues. Last Friday she started screaming at someone named Rose who wanted to drag her to hell, and she didn't want to go. My dad took her to the ER. She has been in for just over a week, and has showed some improvement, but is still talking to her. Rose is telling her she's in trouble, and is telling her to not tell her family she loves us. Going to visit her soon. Hopefully she's doing a bit better today. My mother did the same ish thing 6 months ago. Those hospital visits are the worst thing to go to, not the actual visit, but the drive, the walk, the check-in. It all gives you time to think about how things are ducked. But now my mom is on a different antidepressant, and she's better than she's been in years. Things can get better.